Back to the It Starts With You podcast. I am so excited for our guest today, Desiree Petrich. Desiree, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you,
today.
Julie. Your episode on my podcast was a fan favorite, so I'm really excited about this conversation.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. We had such a good conversation. Yeah, so definitely want to talk about your podcast and all the amazing things you're doing. So I want to introduce Desiree. Desiree is a client, a friend of mine, and I just think it's so funny, Desiree, how the first time we talked, we had so many similarities in things that we focused on. So let's dive in. Desiree is a speaker, author, corporate trainer, and host of the Lead with Confidence podcast. She is the founder and CEO of Intentional Action, which provides training programs in the form of team building experiences, leadership workshops, and personality assessments specifically for teams who want to grow together. Desiree will help you to build a life you love by taking control of what you can control. She will share her story of love, loss, and leadership to inspire and encourage you to take responsibility for your own happiness. Obviously, as she mentioned, she's also the podcast host of Lead with Confidence and a new author. So we're going to talk about, I'm not going to steal your thunder on the book, but amazing, so exciting. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation, like I said. So Desiree is a client of mine who has been in the Speaker Academy to bring her message out, already doing so many amazing things in speaking and workshops. And like I said, from our first conversation, I just felt like we had so many similarities in things that we focus on. So, first of all, just congratulations on the book. How are you feeling?
Good. The whole launching process, the goal was to hit bestseller on Amazon, and by 9:30 p.m. the night of launch, it hit top release in the happiness category. So it was like all of the weight just washed away, and I'm like, okay, it was all worth it for this one moment of just edification. It was fantastic, but I'm so excited.
Congratulations. That is a huge, huge. I know when I was in the process and I didn't have the full book, I had a chapter in a book and someone was doing a lot of that stuff for us. And I didn't know at the time how much goes into like getting people to read it and getting people to, write those reviews and how important that is to get those bestsellers. So that was so much work.
Yes, like I said, it was totally worth it, but now I'm like, what do I do with my time? I can't remember when I wasn't writing or trying to launch a book. So,
Yeah, you'll fill it. We know you'll fill it with all the things that we're going to talk about. So I'd love to hear a little bit first about just like what got you into the leadership space. If you want to share a little bit of your background and kind of what led you into wanting to help leaders.
yeah, so it's not embarrassing because I feel like a lot of people probably can relate to this, but I was hired into a management position with a business management degree and absolutely zero experience. Like I probably should not have been hired into that space. But I was in healthcare administration, I was managing a dementia facility, and I was not a good leader. I was like that typical micromanaging, like leading from a place of fear, which ultimately turns into a little bit of aggression, not willing to delegate, and just all of the taboo things that I now teach against. That was who I was as a leader. And ultimately, my personal development story started when I had my daughter and I was trying to lose weight. So I started reading personal development as a way to better myself. But then the pandemic hit. And I realized like I have been just shuffling along and doing the bare minimum as a leader. And I can't do that now. This entire facility is kind of expecting someone to step up and be the leader, and I was in that position. It needed to be me. So I switched from the personal development of trying to solely better myself in my home life into leadership development. John Maxwell, Simon Sinek, all of the amazing leadership authors kind of became like my best friends. And over the course
Hmm.
of the pandemic, I feel like I grew up a lot. I really shifted into being a leader who was attempting to value other people and to help other people through whatever they were processing. And I continued to read and listen to podcasts and do all of that work since. And so now I've created a business where I get to share that and help other people.
I love that. And one of the things I really love, Desiree, about your approach, and I can hear when we talk and in your book, it's your just like real and honest and like authentic approach. Because for you to, in this level of awareness, which obviously comes from the work you've done, but being able to say, I was micromanaging and I was leading from a place of fear and not, and like, that comes off as aggression and not willing to delegate. Like that is vulnerable to like share those things and be like, oh, this was me. And also, it's so true and honest because I know you work with newer leaders, I work with newer leaders, and that is something that we see, but oftentimes they don't have that awareness to be able to kind of admit to that and do something about
Well, it's
it.
because you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, the people above us, even if they can see that we are probably leading from that place of fear, there's that, that conflict where we're not saying what we mean. We're all walking on eggshells. We're all being way too darn nice to each other. It's like if someone would have just told me, I probably would have been upset at first, but I maybe would have been able to start the process of trying to better myself sooner. But I see that so often. Everyone is just holding back and we're living in a culture where you just have to be nice to each other and I'm like, it's not helpful. It's just not helpful to constantly be holding back those emotions and not willing to be vulnerable with other people. So I always take that first step and if you read my book, I literally hold nothing back.
And I want to like, oh, there's so many things I want to talk about. So I kind of want to dig in from like both approaches about so when you like if someone's listening right now and they are where you used to be, like they're all of a sudden like, yeah, I kind of am doing that too. Like I know I'm micromanaging, I know I'm leading from a place of fear, but I don't know what to do. So I want to kind of talk about that approach and then like the what could somebody who's leading someone like that be doing. So for the first one, if someone's listening and going like, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, what are some of the first steps that you took to kind of help you shift out of that?
Again, hindsight is 2020, so I'm going to tell you like based on what I know now, this is what I wish I would have done. Granted, like I said, you can find the answer to almost any problem in a book. So if that's the route you want to take, but I always say that the best way to connect with the people that we're working with is to further individualize ourselves. And I know that that sounds counterintuitive, but a lot of times our lack of awareness, of self-awareness, is what's causing us to lead specifically others in a way that's not helpful. So personality assessments, understanding why you're leading the way that you're leading, understanding that it's maybe not your quote unquote fault, but there are things that you can do to help it. Emotional intelligence is a big topic of what I talk about. And in a really simple way, if you want to know what emotional intelligence is, when you see a personality assessment, do you immediately look at the strengths of what they tell you that you have or the weaknesses? And if you immediately go to the weaknesses, your emotional intelligence is not very high. You need to look at the strengths of what you have and try and strengthen them even further. But I always say, like, you can't focus on your weaknesses all the time, but no one can do a push up for me. No one can read a book for me. No one can do those things. No one can make those decisions for me. So it's about understanding that your strengths can be strengthened and your weaknesses can also be strengthened. And that's kind of that process that you have to take. It's really starting to understand yourself better, asking yourself the hard questions, whether it's journaling or getting a coach. If you don't know what the right questions are, it's having someone ask you and being willing to listen. You can't just be asking for a compliment. You can't just be asking for someone to make you feel all good and fluffy. Sometimes you have to be willing to hear the hard answers and then to go from there.
Oh, I love that. So it's like taking the steps of doing the personality assessments, but then kind of checking yourself when you're doing it. Obviously, books and being open to that feedback. And that's one thing I know I talk about with emerging leaders all the time is asking for the feedback. But if you're going to ask for it, we also need to be open to receiving it and being in that place to receive it. And if you genuinely have a desire to grow in your career, you have to. Like, that's the only way. And I remember certain instances where I was so used to people telling me how good I was and how great I was at things. And I had a manager who was the one that helped me grow the most, but that was not her like MO. She kind of was like, kind of calling me to the carpet on certain things that I should be doing differently or how I could be showing up differently. And I remember at first being like, what? And now I look back and she was like one of the best mentors I could have had because she was pushing me in different things.
Again, we can't just be nice to one another all of the time. We have to be willing to be a little bit more honest and vulnerable. And I know that those are buzzwords, but they're buzzwords for a reason. Like, we have to be willing to get a little bit more uncomfortable with people. That's what kind of takes us out of that comfort zone, which is never comfortable. It's never actually as comfortable as people think. It's because they're not paying enough attention. So you have to find someone to help you kind of step out of that sometimes.
I love this conversation so much because I also think it depends on personality. Like, I do think just in our interactions we have similar personalities in the sense of we kind of shoot it straight. And like that's kind of always how I've been is where if I have questions, I will ask the question even if it, if people are like, "Oh, why is she asking that?" Like I just remember when I was in corporate and, you know, giving feedback on certain things. And I remember sometimes thinking like, "Oh, am I not being like uh light enough or like you know what I mean, like am I being too, is it coming off too strong or things?" But what to what you're saying, oftentimes what's happening in the workplace is that people, leaders are tolerating behaviors from people because they don't want to have the tough conversation, or people are not addressing things. I say like, what if this is somebody, if you're the leader leading somebody like this, the worst case scenario is they don't change and now the impact to the team or to them. And so now if we kind of look at it from the other lens, if you were, talking to somebody who has a team member like you were, what are some of the things that that leader could be doing to help kind of call them on some of these things and help them shift those?
Yeah, so there's four types of conflict. And I think we all just assume that conflict is the combative, like we're going to end up in an argument in the self-serving sense of we're all trying to get what we want. But the most recognized kind of conflict is actually, it's called collusion. It's a concept from the R. Banger Institute from the book Leadership and Self-Deception, which is, highly recommend it to anyone that feels they might be in this place. And to any leader who has an employee who is maybe in this place, hand them that book, Leadership and Self-Deception. But what collusion is we are inviting from people the things that we don't like to see in them. And that's essentially us just being too nice. We are continuing to invite them to act the way they're acting by not calling them out on it. We're walking on eggshells. Again, we're being too nice. That's what collusion is. And so the issues continue to progress. And if we're not saying anything, then all of a sudden it's like, all right, time to fire this person. And they have no idea they were doing anything wrong.
Yes. Oh my gosh, mic drop on that one.
But and I'm so guilty of it. I've done it too, but that's why I we have to be willing to have those hard conversations. And the productive kind of conflict is walking into a room and saying, this is going to get uncomfortable. It's not going to feel good, but this is a conversation we need to have, and let's break it down so that we can build it back up together. And in my book, I talk about the excuses that we give ourselves for not growing into the people that we want to be. And one of them is give yourself grace. And I know that's hard to hear because that's, again, it's a buzz phrase that we're using right now. Give yourself some grace. And that is absolutely valid. If you need to take a break, I'm giving myself grace in this season of life. Julie and I were having a conversation yesterday that I've been in such an aggressive growth zone for so long. I need to just pull back and give myself some grace in this season. But we can't continuously be giving each other grace because that's not often what we need. When I'm having a conversation with a friend and I'm frustrated about the relationship I have with my spouse or with my boss, or I'm frustrated that my business isn't growing as quickly as I want, and they just say, give yourself grace, it's just a season, it's fine. And I walk away from that conversation and I think that wasn't helpful. Like they're my friend and they love me, and that was probably the response that they were expecting, that I was expecting them to give. But you walk away and you're like, that I didn't need to vent. I needed advice or some tough love, a good kick in the butt. But they don't know that. They're not in a position to give that to you unless you ask. So that's where it comes back to self-awareness of saying, I'm going to complain for a little bit, and maybe I do just need some grace and I need you to give that to me. But a lot of times I need you to give me some advice. What would you do if you were in my situation? I need you to give me some tough love. Tell me to buck up and get over myself and just keep moving forward. Maybe you need help watching your kids so you can have an hour to yourself. That would be the ask that you can have. So whether it's a boss and an employee, a friend to friend, a spouse to spouse, we need to be able to ask for what it is that we need in that moment, and then be okay with the response that they give you. And I have found so much power in that, specifically with my spouse, because he's just, too nonchalant all the time. And I'm like, I just need you to be mad with me.
Yeah. Take on the emotion I
Yeah, just for
have.
like 1 minute would be so nice. But
Yeah.
no, so
I love that.
I
Go
was just
ahead.
going to say that's my biggest advice to a leader in that position where they can see that their employee, it's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't want to do better. It's that they probably just don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I love that, like, some of the pieces we do this in our household. Sometimes we could do better at it, but like from a spouse to spouse perspective, when someone's coming with something, the other person saying like, what do you need? Do you need me to just listen right now? Do you need a solution? And I think creating more of that open conversation in all of our relationships, and also in the workplace. And I know that wasn't something that I saw or got a lot. And if, as leaders, if we could have more confidence in having those conversations, and maybe you have an employee coming to you who's doing these things, like sometimes you have to take the driver's seat and they might not have the awareness of what they're doing, that you just be like, hey, I need to address this. But also trying on, I always like trying on like a different hat. Like sometimes being the coach, sometimes you've got to be the leader, sometimes it's like, the mentor, like kind of trying on these different hats, and maybe saying to them like, are you looking for a solution? Are you looking for me to coach you through that? Are you looking for a listening ear? And again, in the workplace, sometimes we can't do that. We have to give the feedback. But if we're really looking to help someone grow, like maybe we need to coach them through it. So if this is a situation that resonates for you listening, like thinking about how could I have more open communication on these things? How could I have more awareness and find the way that I can support this person through it? And I just love the idea of like, we can't be walking on eggshells all the time. I really love that. I also want to dig in a little bit because obviously you use the word intentional. So, the name of your company. And so how did you decide to use the word intentional? Like, what does that mean for you when you decided to name the company Intentional Action?
This is kind of a two-part question. I mean, I was reading. Like I said, every answer to every question that you have can be found in a book. And when I decided that I didn't want to name my company Desiree Petrich, I wanted to name my company something. I was reading a couple different books at the time, and the word intentional, just kept coming up over and over. And I was like, well, it's the universe is telling me I have to name it this. Like, it just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the message behind it is that we all have good intentions. If you read the back of my book, it says we all have good intentions to scroll less, watch less TV, to eat healthier, exercise more, have better relationships. But those good intentions, if they're not followed by intentional action, just turn into this feeling of guilt that we have that we're not doing what we set out to do. And so instead of just taking action, which ends up sending us in a direction that we didn't choose, if we take intentional action towards those goals that we have, we might not be able to see the outcome. We might not be able to see the ultimate like end game, but we can at least guarantee that we're setting ourselves up in the direction and the trajectory that we want to go, and we can course correct from there as long as we can set ourselves on the right path. So that's what it means to me to be intentional. It's that you are not under the assumption that everything's going to be perfect, because nothing is, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you can at least set yourself up so that if you do fail, you're not so far in the wrong direction that you have to start from scratch. And if you're creating the relationships that you create when you do set that direction, you don't have to start from scratch, and you don't have to do it alone. You have those people that are there to help you.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, we all have the right intentions. We have the intention to do it, but it's like action behind the intention. I really love that, and I don't know, like the play on words too, because it's literally like action is behind the word intention. So it's like I love that, the action behind the intentions that you have.
It's why I also named my book Taking Intentional Action. I
Mm-hmm.
thought for a long time, what do you name a book? And I was like, I don't have to remake the wheel here. Like, I can just, use my company
Right.
name. So it ended up working out. I feel like it really, the whole message of the book is essentially you are in control. Maybe not of everything, but of what you can control, you are in control, and you have to choose that life, because we are all entitled to a fulfilled life. Like, we have that opportunity, but we have to choose it. And that's the message that I try and get across, whether I'm at a corporate workshop or working one-on-one with someone. It doesn't matter. It's what do you want, and how are you going to choose it and go after it and take the intentional action to get it.
What inspired you to write the book? Like obviously you're a big reader, and so you've been reading books. Like what was the thing that you're like, all right, yeah, I've got to write this book?
I, I think that so many books have held, again, I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but they've held the answer to the question that I was asking. And I just thought,
Mm-hmm.
if if I could hold that answer for someone, And them reading my book could be the catalyst for the change that they've been wanting to make for far too long. I wanted to be that for someone. And ultimately, I started my company after my mom passed away in 2022. And I wish she had written a book. Like, I wish I knew what was behind the decisions that she made and the relationships that she had and the hard work and generosity that she went into work with. Like, I wish I knew her thought process on that. And I did in a sense, because she was my mom. But at the same time, I'm like, this is something that will never go away now. This first 30 years of my life is in a book. And regardless of who it is that's reading it, it's like that story won't change. That's who I was and it's how I perceived my life up until this point, and that's not going to change.
How was it for you, the process of writing the book, especially because, you talk about losing your mom and um, like what was the process like for you of writing the book and then kind of bringing out some of these your perceptions, your experiences of your life and how things were up until then?
Emotional to put it short. But
Yeah.
honestly, like the first three chapters, I ended up rewriting completely because the writing was fine. The stories are essentially the same, but the message wasn't coming across like I wanted it to. And so I did a lot of growing up just in the last 9 months of writing this book. Like from the first time that I started writing it until I reread it, and I'm like, that's not what I intended to say. But even with the chapter about my mom, I talk a lot about the situation that she was in at work and how from the outside looking in it could be perceived that the stress of her job maybe had something to do with her stroke. And I know that's not true. And if it is true, it was a decision that my mom made because she loved her job so much and she loved the people that she worked with so much. But on the outside looking in, it could appear like that level of stress had something to do with it. And so the first chapter, the first version that I wrote was extremely emotional. And there was probably more blame put into the chapter than I intended because I didn't really even believe it like that, but that was the way that I wrote it. And I ended up sending it to my mom's best friend who happened to work at this same company with her for a very long time. And I just said, I need a third party perspective, but someone who knew my mom and who knows me and who knows the workplace to make sure that A, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but that I am expressing this story with as much respect and love as possible. And she sent it back with some edits that needed to be made and some stories that could probably be a little less aggressive than they were. And so I rewrote the whole chapter. I resent it to her, and she said, I feel like your mom was back for a little while. I feel
Oh,
like
wow.
I just got to have her back for a little while. And she said, you needed to write that first emotional version to get it out of your system. And she said, I needed to read that first emotional version to get it out of my system. But she said, this is the version that the rest of the world needs to hear. And so
Oh, that's
just
powerful.
that chapter alone, like I reread it and I just said this holds the message that so many people will need to read, even though it's kind of hard. And I've had people message me and they're like, I didn't know your mom, but I got so emotional reading that chapter. It's like sometimes we just, again, we don't know what we don't know. And reading it in the aspect of someone else's perspective can help you to see pieces of yourself that maybe you didn't even know that you needed to address. And that was the point is I'm telling a lot of personal stories. I'm not famous, so it's not a memoir, but there are a lot of personal stories in it that
Mhm.
they hold your own story in them if you're looking for it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that stood out is you were just sharing that example of like, of course, we're human, right? And so and acknowledging that everyone's going to have their own perspective on those situations. And when you talk about, writing that chapter and having a lot of emotion in there, but realizing it didn't really come off the way you wanted, it just made me think of so many situations where people do react so emotionally to things because they're seeing it from their perspective, like in personal life, right? Somebody says something to you and you take it to mean one thing when that was not their intention, or even in the workplace, right? Where someone sends an email, and how quickly do we want to like have like fire coming off the keyboard and responding to them. But it's almost like a tip of doing what you did, where it was like, hey, get it out there maybe in the emotional way you need to, like by yourself in a room if you're going to verbalize it, or like write it, but then maybe go back, either have someone else like iterate with it, or go back and reread it and be like, ooh, is this actually serving the intention that I intended it to?
And that was most of the book. I mean, by the fourth time I reread and edited quite a bit of it, I was like, I can't look at this anymore. I'm like, I got to stop touching it, because at some point you have to just be done. So I am going to make an audiobook version of it. So I will have to reread it one more time, but I don't know that I'll be able to reread it again after that, because I'm just like, I don't know if I'll be able to be happy with it, because we're our own worst critic. I know the book is good.
Oh yeah.
When I first went on in to edit it, I printed it out and pretended like I was reading a book from someone else, so that I could have a little bit more of an unbiased perspective on it, but it's still hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like when we have to watch ourselves back, watch videos, or it's like holding up a mirror right to yourself, like, oh yeah. What do you hope people, like when they get done reading that book, what are like maybe one or two like the biggest things that you hope that they get out of it?
Well, the first one is that you're not alone. I mean, regardless of what it is that you're going through right now, whether it's struggles in the workplace, struggles with relationships that you have, an understanding of life that maybe is not what you had hoped it to be, you're not alone. We all have a lot of those same understandings, and sometimes it's a culture shock to realize that you get to share that with someone else. And so that's one of the messages, is just that we all go through hard things, and there are two choices when you go through hard things: is you can choose to let life happen to you, and life is going to continue to happen around you. It won't wait for you to figure it out. So the other option is to choose. I have a chapter in there about my son being in the NICU. He was born on 2/22/22 during a blizzard, and he had medical issues, but nothing could get to him. We don't have a NICU in our hospital, so the fixed wing airplanes, the helicopters, the ambulances, nothing could get to him to bring him to the NICU. So for 15 hours, he had, lines put in that were not meant for a baby, and cobbled together respiratory equipment, and the pediatrician took the day off, and there's 15 nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists with him. And it's like, in that moment, I could control none of that. None of it was within my control, but my mindset and the conversations I was having with my husband and the way that I treated the doctors and nurses, those were the things that were in my control. And so I list out all of the different things that felt completely hard and just without any grace, but you can still find the appreciation and gratitude and essentially happiness in those moments, as long as you're willing to choose it, as long as you're willing to look for it. And that's what personal development work has done for me, is it almost kind of prepared me in a way for these really hard things that ended up happening.
Gosh, and I get goosebumps when you, like, I even read that, in the book, and it's just like, to hear that and to be able to have that perspective, right? Because that's the thing, I talk a lot about that. I've talked a lot about that in my talks and my podcast, where it's like all these things that happen to you in life, and it can be so easy to just like throw your hands up and be like, really? Like, really? Are we done? I always say, like, I feel like I've been saying it so much lately, because I feel like a lot of, either people in my world or clients or things have had these crazy things happen to them lately. And I'm like, man, life is really lifing right now. But that perspective that you can take, and a lot of that is because of the work you have done, which is, again, we're similar. And like, I dove into personal development, which is what led me here. And some people are further along in it and some are new to it, where it's just like, it equips you to be able to handle when life just keeps coming.
Yeah, so if that's the second message in the book, it's life will not wait for you to figure out how to handle it in a way that makes you proud and makes you feel like your purpose and passion and all the things that everyone's searching for, it's not going to wait for you to find them. You kind of have to choose, and you are not stuck with that choice. I think everyone thinks that once you decide something like that, it has to be your life's mission to follow that out. I'm like, I started in healthcare. I was in healthcare for 10 years. Then I went into printing. Then I went into events coordinating. And now I own a leadership development company. Like, you get to write your life. You get to decide what it looks like. regardless of the bad things that happen, the things that are outside of your control, you really do get to decide what you want it to look like. And so you're not wrong. I always say we are all adults. You are not wrong. Whatever decision that you make will hold a lesson for you as long as you went through the thought process to ask yourself the right questions. You were making that decision with the knowledge and understanding and emotions that you had in that moment, and you are not wrong. There is a lesson there. And as long as you learn from that lesson, it will benefit you.
And that's gosh, that's one where people, you should pause those listening and like re-listen to that, because that could really land for a lot of people. Like just even being told you're not wrong, people are so worried about making the wrong choice, the wrong decision, and they feel like they're stuck or it's permanent. And that just reminder of like, you can pivot, you can change, you can evolve, you can be like, oh wow, ooh, I learned that lesson over there, and I'm gonna go learn this lesson. And I know for me, if perfectionists, like high achievers, a lot of the people that we work with and interact with as well, where it's like you feel like you have to be so carefully curate like every step that you take. And then if you have one little misstep, like the world's gonna end. When usually, in my experience now, is that little misstep like illuminates like a whole new path for you.
And relationships. Every misstep that I have taken has created a relationship around that vulnerability that I now get to take with me in the next step. So I don't even know what is failure at this point. I've done it so many times. I wouldn't even know
Right.
how to describe it.
Right. Right. It's yeah, that's the thing, that's a huge shift I think that takes when you dive into the world of personal development, because had you asked me that, you know, 8 years ago, for me, failure would be like not doing things the way people expected me to do them, or, not saying things exactly the way that I should, or messing up on a project. Whereas now, like you said, it's like, I don't really believe that to be true, because what is the right way to say something, or what is, doing the exact thing on the project, because everybody would do it differently. So I love that too, where it's like, it's their lessons. I think the only way for me now that I would define that is like not even just trying.
Well, and you've said this, I mean, in your speaker academy, it's you can't be for everyone. Because I can have 50 people fill out a survey at the end, and 49 of them can love everything that I said. And the one person who doesn't, I start the process of thinking, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? And I'm like, if I had done something differently or better, the other 49 might not have enjoyed it as much as they did. So at some point, you just have to take on those disappointments, if that's what you want to call it, and just like, kind of let it sink in. It's okay that not everyone loves you. The fact that you're being you, the fact that someone didn't like you is probably a good thing, because it means that you were you enough that the other people got to enjoy it, and that you were that authentic enough that you showed your true colors and you weren't trying to be everything for everyone, because you can't be. I don't know what my point was there, but it felt like that message needed to be told.
Yeah. I loved it. No, it was great, because this idea of opening yourself up to feedback too. And I love that you share that with, part of the Speaker Academy. And we talk about asking your audience for feedback and how we can use that in so many different ways. But just like you said, I share, like, you're opening yourself up. You can get done speaking and leading a session and just be like, oh my gosh, I did amazing, which is great. I'm sure we all did. And also, we don't really know until we open ourselves up to that feedback, and taking that again with a little bit of a grain of salt, but using it to learn, and also realizing, right, not every single person in that audience is going to love what you have to say, but there's going to be so many people that do, and that your message is going to land for. So tell us a little bit more about, yeah, just your experience in getting your message out there more with speaking, and what are some of your goals with that, and your experience having gone through the academy to kind of help bring all of your pieces together.
I am someone who kind of feels like they need to have accountability. And so when I found you in the Speaker Academy, I was like, this is what I need. I don't even know that a lot of the stuff that you're teaching is that new, but it's the way that you teach it that it hits differently for whatever reason. And so going out and doing the exact same thing that I maybe did a month ago just feels different. It feels better. And ultimately, my goal with speaking is that the corporate business that I have of leadership and development and workshops and all of the things, it's like I just get to better my skills with that. And And then when other people need those skills, I now know how to teach it and I know what I can say. And I feel like I've been through that process. So being able to have gone through something like this with other people that are also in the academy who have different goals than I do, it's also just being able to see things from a different point of view, which if I was sitting here trying to do it myself, it I would only be looking at me and I wouldn't hear those personal stories from other people and maybe the path that they went down that makes me almost feel like I maybe even have it better than I thought I did. Like, why am I being so darn hard on myself? And it's just seeing that other point of view and that perspective from other people that I truly believe in trying to be in some sort of container like that to be able to see those things. And I don't know what's coming next, but like I said, I've done everything I can up until this point to set myself in the right direction. And it's inevitable that I will, as long as I continue to choose it, I will continue to go down that right path, even though I don't know what the end goal looks like.
I love that you say that too. I mean, obviously, it's a big proponent for me being in community, being with other people, where it's like, I mean, just think about that. If you really think about all the books that we read in the personal development space, all the speakers we see, all the conferences we go to, the core message of what they're saying is not really that different, right? We talk about, some of the science behind it, and, I obviously am big into Tony Robbins. I've gone to his event and, thinking about, what you focus on expands, like kind of all of his like phrases that he says, like in general, the majority of the speakers are speaking on those things, but it's the way that they say them that it lands for you. Like I know there's been a message that I've heard multiple speakers talk about, but it's like someone would say it in a way that I was like, oh, now I get it. Or I'm at a stage in my life where now I feel it. And that's what I love about, the speaking space as well is like we are not only as a speaker do I get to go out and help empower people and activate something in them through my story, but then helping other people to get their message out where I'm like, it's just this ripple effect that we get to see. And your approach and your message will land for people different. And so, like, this is for you as much as for everybody else listening, whether you're speaking or you just want to speak up more in corporate. Because I always say I'm helping people speak, whether in the boardroom or from stage, is that you have something that you can share with people and help people in a unique way that only you can. You don't need to have some completely novel idea that nobody's ever talked about because in reality, there's not that many of those out there. It's that your approach, your style, the way that you say it is going to land with people differently and help people. And that's like your book. You love books and you've read all these different books and there's probably a lot of commonalities in a lot of them, but they've all kind of landed for you differently. And your book's going to do the same thing for so many other people as well.
Yeah, and people say like I haven't had anything crazy happen to me and I'm like, yeah, my mom passed away, but that's a 3-minute story out of an hour-long keynote. Like most of my stories are here's the best piece of business advice I got. Here's the worst piece of business advice that I got. It's stories that everyone has. Your version just looks very different. And one of the feedback pieces that I got after a presentation that I gave was you didn't give enough statistics. And I'm like, when I sit in a keynote and have to listen to statistics, I fall asleep. I don't remember any of them. It's like, that's not what I like. So I turn around and I give the kind of keynote that I like. And if you can stay true to what that is and the message that you want to give and the message that you would have enjoyed receiving at some point in your life, we're all speaking to the people that we once were. That's who we're coaching. That's who we're speaking to. And I'm speaking to the message that I wish I had 5-10 years ago. And if someone doesn't like that, that's okay. You kind of have to get used to that because it's going to continue to happen. But also
Yep.
it's good for you to see that other point of view. And there's a difference between defending yourself and getting defensive. And getting defensive would be, oh my God, that person didn't like me. They probably were just in a bad mood, whatever. And defending yourself is saying, I understand that person didn't like it. And that's okay because I stayed true to who I was. And this is why I told it in the way that I did.
I love that differentiation too, and being able to have like kind of this thick skin too, right? We're gonna put ourselves out there, and being able to take it and own it, and be like, yeah, this is who I am. Oh, I love this conversation so much, Desiree, from, talking about what led you into the business that you're in. I love that are authentic and sharing personal stories, giving people tips if they were in a leadership, space, maybe right now where you were, where they're like, ooh, I have opportunities here. Or even from the other side, if you're leading a person or a team, whether it's one person or a big team of people who might have some of those, kind of characteristics right now that you can help them with, and then what intention means to you, and obviously talking about your book. So this was such a great conversation. I know people are going to want to stay connected and follow you. So share with those listening how they can follow along with you and what you've got going on.
So I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Desiree Petrich. You can buy my book. If you can go to my website, desireepetrich.com/book, you can find all the details. Like I said, have a podcast as well. So I have a podcast episode. It's called Beyond the Book. Everything from the writing process to different stories that didn't end up being in the book, that is on that page. So desireepetrich.com/book. And if you happen to be a reader, or if you want to see what all the hype is about, I have a free download. It's at desireepetrich.com/books. So BOOKS. You can get a list of all my favorite nonfiction, leadership, personal growth, fiction, parenting, you name it. It's all there. Memoirs. I love a good memoir. So those are listed there too. But I would love to stay in touch with you. So reach out. Let me know what you thought of. If you disagree, I always say I love to argue. And again, it's not because I'm arguing that my point is right. It's because I want to make sure you know why you believe in your point and that point of view. And so I love to argue. If you want to have anything to say about this, reach out. I'd love to chat with you.
I love that. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure that we share that. You can scroll down and check out the show notes as well, where we'll link all that stuff. And I'm going to check out your download because I love books. I have like a whole bookshelf up here. But like, I know that there's some that you have that I have not read. So I'm definitely going to check this out. Desiree, thank you so much for your conversation, for being open and, transparent with everyone, and for sharing your story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.